Today we are addressing the topic of how societies react to and even regulate new technologies. But let's start, as usual, with a story. Picture the mid-19th century in the United Kingdom. The age of horse-drawn carriages was in full swing. Railways were also becoming increasingly important for transportation. Then, a new invention began to appear, the self-propelled road vehicle, the early automobile. To many, it is not a marvel, but a dangerous machine. These horseless carriages were noisy, unreliable, and often frightened people and horses. To many, they seemed like a dangerous and unnecessary disruption of what was already working. Existing industries, like those involved in horse-drawn transport and even the rapidly growing railway industry, felt threatened by this new kind of technology. They worried about their investments and the potential for job loss. Yes, after all, if people began favoring these new vehicles, entire livelihoods would be at stake, from blacksmiths and carriage makers to stable owners and coachmen. But the concerns weren't just economic or emotional. There were real incidents that fueled public anxiety. One of the earliest steam-powered road vehicles was built by Richard Trevithick in 1803, called the London Steam Carriage. During one test run, after being left unattended, the vehicle reportedly rolled into and set fire to a shed. Though no one was killed, the fire made headlines and gave weight to concerns about the danger these machines posed in untrained hands. In response to these concerns and fears, the British government enacted a series of laws, culminating in the Locomotive Act of 1865, famously known as the Red Flag Act. This act imposed some extraordinary restrictions on these newfangled vehicles. At its core, this law aimed to curtail the spread and impact of self-propelled vehicles. The most iconic provision was that every self-propelled vehicle had to have a crew of at least 3 people: a driver, a stoker for steam-powered vehicles, and a person who had to walk at least 55 meters ahead of the vehicle carrying a red flag. This flagman was responsible for warning other road users, especially those with horses, of the vehicle's approach and even signaling the vehicle to stop if necessary. This flag bearer was a living symbol of caution, a literal warning sign that something disruptive was approaching. It was a vivid embodiment of fear-driven regulation. The Act imposed incredibly low speed limits, just 4 miles per hour, 6.437 kilometers per hour in the countryside, and a mere 2 miles per hour, 3.22 kilometers per hour in towns and cities. This effectively limited the speed of these new machines to little more than a walking pace. Imagine the frustration of the early automobile enthusiasts. To many at the time, especially those invested in horses and carriages, this law likely seemed sensible. Horses were a familiar and established mode of transport. These new, unpredictable machines were seen as dangerous and disruptive. Farmers, in particular, who relied heavily on horses, might have felt their way of life was under threat. The fear of the unknown and the potential for accidents involving these new, fast-moving, or so they seemed at the time, vehicles was noticeable. The red flag was not just a safety measure, it was a symbol of an entire society trying to protect itself from the future. There was also the underlying fear of being replaced by this new technology, a concern that resonates even today. As time went on, however, these fears began to be challenged by reality. As automobile technology improved and became more reliable, the absurdity of the Red Flag Act became increasingly apparent. It became increasingly clear that the Red Flag Act was holding Britain back. It severely hindered the development of the British automotive industry and enabled countries like France and Germany, unburdened by such stringent regulations, to have a major head start in this field of technology. Finally, in 1896, the Red Flag Act was repealed. The speed limit was raised to a more reasonable 14 miles per hour, 22.5 kilometers per hour. and the requirement for the flagman was abolished. This marked a turning point for the British automobile industry, allowing it to finally progress more freely. But the damage had been done. The UK had lost its early lead in the automotive industry. The story of the Red Flag Act serves as a fascinating example of how fear and resistance can shape the initial regulation of new technologies. While the concerns about safety and disruption were understandable at the time, the overly restrictive nature of the Act ultimately hindered progress for society and technology. It highlights the tension between embracing innovation and managing the perceived risks associated with it. It serves as a valuable lesson of the inevitable progress of technology, even with imposed regulations, and the importance of adjusting to upcoming changes. Now, let's think about this story in relation to today's world, particularly in the realm of computer science and emerging technologies like artificial intelligence or other technologies. Can we see parallels between the initial reaction to automobiles and the current discussions and debates surrounding AI? Are there similar fears about job displacement or the disruption of existing industries? Why do you think the Red Flag Act, which seems so ridiculous to us now, might have made sense to people in the 19th century? What does this tell us about the psychology of fear and our perception of new technologies? Are there any modern-day regulations or proposed regulations on new technologies that remind you of the Red Flag Act? Perhaps something that seems overly cautious or potentially stifles innovation.